may be seated. So we've been talking about this process of crossing over from death into life, how the cross impacts our lives. Here in this Lenten season, as we approach Easter, we're looking at what does the death of Jesus mean? How does that impact us? And today we're talking about crossing over from positions of safety to positions of sacrifice. Now, we all know that safety is an important thing, right? I mean, we're taught from an early age, safety first. That's important stuff. And so don't hear me wrong. We're all about safety here in certain ways. But there's a form of safety that's not good. I hope you understand. I'm sharing this story with permission from my wife. In fact, she actually suggested that I tell it. So I need to tell you that before I tell the story, okay? Because last week she was out of town, and she was visiting some relatives of hers in Florida and had a great time. And they have a neighbor that they have built a homemade giant cage in their yard where they keep a couple of cougars, like real dangerous kind of animals, right? You know, not like these used to be in a circus and now they're retired and stuff, but like somebody caught them and now they live in this cage. I don't know why. I don't see the point. But these people think that these are amazing animals to have around. And these are the kind of people that someday are going to be on the news. And I'm going to be saying, I told you so. You never should have had those cougars in your yard, right? So last week, I'm going about my merry business here with the kids and church stuff and all that. And she sends me a text. I look down, and here's a picture of her inside the cougar cage with the cougar. I'm like, what is wrong with you? How long do you want this time of it just being me and the kids? I mean, I've paid up your life insurance and all, but I wasn't planning on us using it, right? Safety is an important thing. Don't go in cages with wild animals. It just doesn't make sense, right? But I was reading a study. It was called this study is called Play It Safe. And it's a report, and it gives some statistics around how fatal accidents happen. It says this: avoid riding in automobiles, for they're responsible for 20% of all fatal accidents. 1 in 5. And you made it here safely today, so that's good. You're doing well. So you might say, okay, next week, no problem, I'll walk to church. Surely that would be safe, right? Wrong. Avoid walking on streets or sidewalks, because 14% of all accidents occur to pedestrians. Also avoid traveling by air, rail, or water. 15% of all accidents involve these forms of transportation. So here we have half of these accidents are transportation related. So maybe we should just stay home. That would surely be safe, right? Not so quick. 17% of all accidents occur in the home. So of the remaining 33% of folks who are dying from these accidents, you know where 32% of them die? Hospitals. Above all, don't go to the hospital. That's the worst. And definitely don't drive in a car to a hospital, because then you're in serious trouble, right? Of course, hospitals kind of have the odds stacked against them, because usually when we get there, we're in bad shape, right? But you will be pleased to know this important stat. 0.001% of all deaths occur where? In worship services in church. You're in the safest place you could be right now. Give yourselves a hand, right? Unless you drove in a car, then you're in serious trouble, but that's beside the point. But regardless, how silly would it be if we tried to live by this? You couldn't go anywhere, right? You couldn't do anything. And while statistically you may be safer, you would definitely be missing out on life. Safety is an important thing, but it can become something that can be bad if we're unwilling to listen to the calling of God in our lives on a deeper level, not just like physical safety stuff, but God calls us sometimes to leave safe spaces in our lives, to be willing to step out into areas that are maybe a little uncharted or maybe a little unknown for us. So we have this decision: do we move from safety into sacrifice, or do we just kind of hang out over here where it's safe? Sometimes we have to step out courageously from where we've always been. We step out into kind of some uncharted waters. What's that look like for you? What would that next step be for you? It's been said that a calm sea does not produce good sailors. Anybody can sit on a boat in calm waters. You want to be a good sailor? You got to get out there in the storm. You got to get some waves hitting at your boat. You got to get some wind coming at you. That's got to happen. Imagine if Christopher Columbus would have gotten into the boat and said, we're going to kind of play it safe, so let's not go anywhere where we lose sight of the shore. Because if we lose sight of the shore and a storm comes up, we're in big trouble, right? What would have happened? He never would have gotten over here, would he? If we want to discover new oceans, we've got to be able to press into those unknown areas. If we want to do that in our lives, to discover what God has for us, we've got to be willing to take those courageous steps. A man named Peter, he was one of the followers of Jesus. In fact, one of Jesus' kind of inner circle of disciples. His name was actually Simon. When Jesus met him, he renamed him Peter. Peter means rock, and Jesus said that on this rock, Peter, I am going to build my church. That's a pretty high calling, don't you think? Of all the disciples, Peter's going to be the central one, the rock on whom Jesus is going to build his church. Now, sometimes Peter was very solid. Other times, not so much. Today, we're going to look at a story where it's right before Jesus is going to give his life for us. So very appropriate for this season of Lent. And Jesus is meeting with his disciples, and they're celebrating the Passover meal for the last time together. It's right before Jesus is going to give his life for our sins. And so Jesus is meeting with them, and he says this to Peter. Luke chapter 22, beginning in verse 31. He says, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you as wheat. Now, this is a strange statement for us. We don't use all these farming metaphors. He's basically saying, Peter, Satan has asked to tear you up. Now, if I'm Peter, I'm going to say, okay, and what was your answer to this question? Satan wants to tear me up. Did you say yes or no? Because that's a significant thing, right? And Jesus doesn't really answer it that way. He says, instead, I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you've turned back, strengthen your brothers, the other disciples. But Peter doesn't like this. He replies and says, Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death. Jesus answered, I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows today, you'll deny 3 times that you know me. Now that had to hurt if you're Peter. Peter's saying, look, maybe Satan's after me, whatever. I'm fine, right? I would die with you. I would go to prison with you. Lord, I'm your guy. Remember, I'm the rock, okay? I'm too big to fail. I'm not going to fall into that kind of stuff. And Jesus says, actually, before morning, 3 times you're going to deny that you even know me. Forget going to prison or dying. You're going to say you don't even know who I am. Peter was going to face some serious temptation. We learn from this story that Jesus certainly believes that we have a tempter, Satan. Jesus believes that he's real. But we have this great hope. That it's not just that we have Satan, who's the father of lies, who tempts us, but we have hope in Jesus. The Bible tells us, greater is he that's in you, that's Jesus, than the one who's in the world, that's Satan. Jesus is stronger than Satan. 1 Corinthians 10:13 says, but remember that the temptations that have come into your life are no different than what others experience. God is faithful. He will keep the temptation from being so strong that you can't stand up to it. When you are tempted, he will show you a way out so that you will not give in to it. That's great hope. It says, basically, you're not going to face like the mother of all temptations that you cannot say no to. When you face temptation, you can say no. It's not always easy, but you can do it. It is possible for you to say no to temptation, to resist temptation. Satan lies to us. He tells us we're not good enough. He tells us that we've messed up too many times. God can't love you. You know what you've done. Certainly God couldn't forgive that. God can't use you. You've messed up so much. Your life is not meaningful. Your life is worthless. You should just kill yourself. That's Satan, the father of lies. And it's just that. It's a lie. It's a lie because we find true freedom in Jesus Christ. So that night, Jesus predicts that Peter's going to deny him. Doesn't mean that he causes that. It means that he knows that, because Jesus knows the future. And so Jesus makes this prediction. Then they finish dinner, they leave from that place, they go out to the garden where Jesus is praying. Remember, he takes Peter and a few of the other disciples, and he says, stay here and pray. And he goes over there and he prays. Jesus comes back. What are they doing? They're sleeping. He wakes them up. Stay here and pray. Leaves, comes back, they're sleeping. Repeat cycle. They can't even stay awake with Jesus. Then Judas, the betrayer, shows up. He comes, he kisses Jesus, he betrays him, and the Jewish leaders seize Jesus. The other disciples, many of them, they flee. What happens with Peter? Well, it says this, verse 54. And seizing Jesus, they led him away and took him into the house of the high priest. Peter followed at a distance. So he doesn't totally abandon Jesus, but he hangs back a safe distance, because certainly this is a situation that's concerning him. Jesus has been arrested by the Jewish leaders. When they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked at him closely and said, this man was with him. Okay, now you got to understand what's happening here. Servant girl, other translations say a young servant girl, quite possibly junior high age girl here. Legally, she has no standing. She can't testify in a court of law. She's not even accusing Peter of doing anything wrong. She's just saying, hey, this guy was with that Jesus guy. Now, Jesus has been arrested because of his claims about himself, his claims to be God. Jewish leaders don't like that. Peter hadn't been doing that. Peter is not facing immediate danger. Peter's only facing maybe the thought of potential danger. Okay? So he's still in a fairly safe place here. And she says, hey, weren't you one of those ones with Jesus? But he denied it. Woman, I don't know him, he said. Sound familiar? A little while later, someone else saw him and said, you are certainly one of them. Man, I am not, Peter replied. About an hour later, after he's had an hour to think this through, right? Another asserted, surely this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean. Galileans had a different accent. They're down in Jerusalem, that's farther south. Galilee's up in the north. Jesus was known as doing most of his ministry up north. And they say, hey, listen to him talk. He's a Galilean. He was with Jesus. He is one of those guys. And he says, man, I don't know what you're talking about. Just as Peter was speaking, the rooster crowed. Imagine what that sounded like in his ears. Then suddenly, the Lord turned, looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the words the Lord had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly. Can you imagine what that gaze from Jesus must have felt like? It must have been soul-piercing. I mean, here Peter has shot off his mouth again. I'll go to prison with you. I'll die with you. But no. When the heat is turned up by a little girl, he falls. He fails. He messes up. When others come to him and again challenge his position of safety just a bit, does he move to a potential position of sacrifice? No, he moves farther to safety. I don't even know what you're talking about. He denies Jesus in Jesus' greatest hour of need. And if you're taking notes, you'll see that even the best people fail Jesus sometime. I mean, Peter, again, the rock, soon Peter is going to become the foundation of this church. He's going to be the leader of the Jerusalem church. In fact, in a few weeks, Peter is going to be empowered by the Holy Spirit. He's going to preach a sermon. He's going to be speaking in other languages. Thousands of people are going to come to know Jesus through Peter. Just weeks down the road, okay? So this is Peter, certainly a foundational figure in our faith. Somebody who will even write books in the Bible, and yet he fails, falls flat on his face. And we look at Peter and say, how is this possible? Jesus even told you what was going to happen. He told you what the test was going to be. You know, it's like you're going in to take a test and somebody's like, hey, number 9, it's going to sound like it's true, but it's really false. So make sure you put down false. And you get to number 9 and you're like, that's so true. That's impossible. It's got to be true. They told you it was false, right? And here Peter, he gives the wrong answer. Even though he knows what's going to happen, he fails. He stays in his position of safety instead of moving to a position of sacrifice. What is wrong with you, Peter? Don't you trust Jesus? Don't you believe in Jesus? This is so shameful. And it's really easy to judge Peter until we look back at our own lives and we see ourselves. I see myself doing the same exact thing. It's easy to stay in that position of safety when the opportunity comes for sacrifice. Maybe it's around the water cooler at work, and that you folks who are knocking your faith, insulting Christianity, and you know that you should say something, but you just choose to stay quiet instead. Or maybe it's at school or with friends or somebody else, and somebody is bullying or picking on somebody else. And you know that Jesus wants you to stand up for that person, to show love, to take that risk, to stand up and say, we shouldn't do this. This isn't right. But instead you remain silent. Or you know that Jesus is calling you to be more generous with your resources so that others can have food, can have clothing, can hear about Jesus, whatever it may be. But instead you just say, I'd rather go buy more stuff for me. That seems safer. That seems easier. That seems like more fun. You know, when we do these things, when we have the opportunity to affirm Jesus, to follow Jesus, to live out our faith, and we don't, sometimes we do it, we say, you know what, I don't want to be some fanatic, or I don't want to cram my faith down people's throats. Well, you don't have to do it in a ridiculous way. There's good, healthy ways of doing this. But instead of, when we reject those healthy ways and instead sit in silence and refuse to move to that position of sacrifice, we basically are saying to the world, you know what? You can go to hell. Just as so, I look good in the process. I don't want to say that. I don't want that to be my life story. I mean, Jesus loved the world so much that he would make the ultimate sacrifice for us. And yet, like Peter, we oftentimes mess up and we deny him with our actions, with our words. And we'll stand up for all sorts of lesser things. I mean, God forbid that someone say something critical about your favorite football team, right? You'll stand up for that. I bet you will. I will. We all will, right? Or you just go try to convince my kids that there is any finer Mexican cuisine in all of Dayton than what you'll find at Taco Bell. They'll fight you on that. They think it's the best stuff out there, right? That's my kids for you. I don't know what to tell you. But we'll stand up for the dumbest stuff, won't we? But yet when it's our faith, we oftentimes say, no, it's safer. It's less risky for me to be over here than to move into that position of potential sacrifice. But we have this great hope. We have this great hope because even though you fail and I fail and Peter failed, we have this faith in Jesus. 2 Timothy 2:13 says it so well. It says, if we are faithless, he will remain faithful. Memorize that. If we are faithless, he remains faithful. When John fails, Jesus doesn't fail. When Peter denies Jesus, Jesus does not deny Peter. When we let God down, he doesn't stop reaching out to us. You can't mess up so much that God quits on you. You can't. I don't care how badly you've messed it up, how many times you've failed, how many times you've gone back to that thing you said you never would. When we are faithless, he remains faithful. That's why it's called the gospel or the good news. Because the truth is, we all know that our lives are messed up. We mess lots of stuff up. But when we are faithless, he remains faithful. Jesus doesn't fail us. That's how this relationship is possible. Jesus remains constant even when we're constant. Jesus always gives 100% even when we give 0%. He never quits. He never gives up on us. Well, this all happens early on a Friday morning, late on a Thursday night. So Jesus, the next day, is crucified on Friday. Saturday, he's in the tomb, and it's the Sabbath. Everyone is resting. And Sunday, early in the morning, the women, they come to the tomb to finish embalming Jesus' body. They hadn't had time to do that before. And they find the tomb to be empty. Now, we know the end of the story and say, yay, resurrection, but they didn't know for sure what's going on at that point. There's lots of potential bad options. So they go back to the disciples. They tell them, one of the gospel accounts says the disciples ran to the tomb to see what's happening. It's almost this little like foot race thing. And do you know who's the fastest? Is Peter. Why? Because Peter's got some stuff to deal with here. Imagine what it was like to sit there Friday, Saturday, all day. All you can think about is those 3 times that you said you don't even know Jesus. And then he looked at you with that hurt in his eyes, and that's all you can remember. You can't sleep, you can't think about anything else. So Peter's first to the tomb. Jesus, of course, is not there. Gospel of John tells us that the disciples went, and they went back to fishing. They went back to fishing. It was almost like Peter was going back to what he did before he knew Jesus. And so they're out in the boat, and this is an incredible story that they're out in the boat, and the sun is just starting to come up, and they see this figure over on the shore. Can't really see what it is. And he says, friends, how's it going? How's the fishing? And they say, terrible. We've fished all night. We've caught nothing. And he says, well, why don't you try throwing your nets over the other side of the boat? Say, funny. Jesus told us that one time, and actually it worked out all right. Why not? They throw the nets over, and what happens? They're filled with fish. And Peter knows what's happening. This isn't a coincidence. No. Peter doesn't even bother to pull in the net. Instead, he jumps himself into the lake and swims to the shore and meets with Jesus. Jesus is there on the shore. He's got a little fire going, and he's cooking breakfast. Now, this is important because some other faiths will tell you that Jesus didn't actually raise from the dead, that it was just a spiritual thing. He didn't physically raise from the dead. But he sits and he eats with his disciples. That's important because ghosts, spiritual beings, they don't eat, right? That doesn't happen. There's no such thing as like ghost lucky charms, right? They can't eat. Jesus really rose from the dead. So the risen Christ is here, and he's eating breakfast with Peter and the disciples. After breakfast, had to be kind of an awkward time for Peter, because he knows Jesus. Jesus certainly remembers this whole thing about the denial and all that stuff. After breakfast, Jesus pulls Peter aside. John 21:15. After breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these, the other disciples? Seems like an easy question. Yes, Lord, Peter replied, you know that I love you. Then feed my lambs, Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the question. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, Peter said, you know that I love you. Jesus replies, feed my lambs, take care of my sheep. Then one more time, he says, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And this 3 things, it's not coincidental. These 3 questions, suddenly it hits Peter what's going on here. 3 denials, 3 questions. Peter's hurt. Peter was grieved that Jesus asked the question a 3rd time. He said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Jesus said, then feed my sheep. The truth is, when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and others will direct you and take you where you don't want to go. Jesus said this to let him know what kind of death he would die to glorify God. Then Jesus told him, follow me. Recognize those words? First words that Jesus had spoken to Peter. Follow me. Words that changed his life. A younger Peter had heard those words, and he put the fishing business aside. Left his boat, left his nets, left everything he knew, stepped from a pretty safe position into a potential sacrificial position to follow Jesus. And he gave up a lot those years to follow Jesus. Some people probably thought he was a little nutty following Jesus around. And there were times it was great, there was times it was tougher. But Peter continues to follow Jesus until we get to this point at the end where Jesus even tells him what's going to happen to him, and he fails. He messes up. He drops the ball. Jesus could have come back and said, Peter, you're a wuss. When the heat was turned up, you said no. Or Peter, you're a liar. You're a liar. You wouldn't even tell the truth about me. Or he could have just said, Peter, I told you so. Ooh, I'm going to prison for you. No, I don't think so. You're going to deny you even know me. But he doesn't say any of those. Instead, he says the same thing that he says to you and to me, follow me. When we are faithless, he remains faithful. When we mess up, he doesn't quit. When we fall short, his calling stays the same in our lives. Follow me. The same words are extended to you and to me this day. Because, like Peter, we've all sinned. We've all messed up. And our sins separate us from God. You'll see in your notes that sin is more than just the breaking of God's laws. It's the breaking of God's heart. We saw that in that gaze that Jesus gave to Peter. And we experience that when we personally fall short. And we feel that pain, that twinge of our conscience saying, that's not God's best for you. That's not what you should be doing. Or you're avoiding that good thing that you should be doing. And that sin, it separates us from God. It damages that relationship, that friendship with Jesus. And this friendship is so important. How do we move from safety to sacrifice? It's all about that friendship with Jesus. You'll make a lot of sacrifices for your good friends. You'll make a lot of sacrifices for your kids, for your families, for others. That's good. That's important. And if we're going to make sacrifices for Jesus, that happens because of our friendship with him, our relationship with him. It says, Jesus has changed me. Friendship with Jesus is the key to moving from safety to sacrifice. That friendship with Jesus, as we invest in that and as that grows, we're willing to do more and more for Jesus, to give ourselves more and more fully to Jesus. Peter's life is a perfect example. Even though he messed up, he wasn't done, and Jesus wasn't done with him. No, Jesus would he would build his church on Peter. History tells us that years later, after this church has grown up in Jerusalem and the movement of Jesus Christ, the kingdom movement is growing and it's spreading, the church began to face heavy persecution, both from Jews and from Romans alike. And Peter was caught up in this. He was arrested. He was facing the threat of death. And they gave him an option. They gave him a simple option. They said, Peter, you can go free. No problems, no charges, no death sentence, no nothing. You just got to do one thing. You just got to deny Jesus Christ. Should be easy, right? Peter's an old pro at that. He did it 3 times when Jesus was standing right there, for crying out loud. But this day it's different. This friendship with Jesus has grown in Peter's life. He's seen Jesus working through him, building his church, building his kingdom. And that day, Peter says, then crucify me. If those are the options, I'll go to the cross. But here's the thing. I'm not worthy to die like he did. So if you're going to crucify me, you've got to crucify me upside down. And that's how Peter died. The man who wouldn't even acknowledge Jesus when he was standing right over there later gives his life as a martyr for our faith. Friendship with Jesus makes it possible to move from safety to sacrifice. Real life is found when we have the courage to move from safety to sacrifice. Instead of saying, I'm going to play it safe, I'm going to just stay where I can always see the shore, I'm not going to really let God do much with me, I'm not going to be challenged, I'm not going to sacrifice. That's not where life is. Life is out there in the deep waters. That's where we find Jesus meeting us. This weekend, we celebrate a wonderful anniversary, the 50th anniversary of the March on Selma. And there's so many great stories that come out of that. When followers of Jesus followed the leading of Dr. King, and they said, all God's children are created equal. Doesn't matter the color of their skin, their gender, any of these other things. No, all God's children are created equal. All should have the right to vote in this great country. Many of them made great sacrifices. There was a pastor, his name was Reverend James Reeb, 38 years old, lived in Massachusetts. James had a good life. He had a wife, he had 4 kids, had his church. Things were going fine for him. He felt the calling, though, to make a dangerous move, to move from the safety of his home and to go attend this march in Selma. So he left. He made the journey to Alabama. One night there, he had had dinner with a few others. They walked out of the restaurant when 4 guys grabbed him. They were armed with clubs, and they beat him senseless. He would be hospitalized. They would do brain surgery on him, but 2 days later, Reverend Reeb would die. He would make the ultimate sacrifice. He left his position of safety and sacrificed his life so that others could have this great freedom, so that our nation can be changed. And his sacrifice made an impact. The president actually called his widow to express his condolences to her. And just a few days later, President Johnson would bring the Voting Rights Act to Congress. And our nation would be changed. This world would be changed for the better forever. And it's all in part due to that great sacrifice and the sacrifices of many, many others. What sacrifice is God calling you to make? You never know what the impact may be. You just don't. We make sacrifices that seem little and small, and they make impacts beyond what we can ever imagine. I bet you can look in your life and say, here's times where people made little sacrifices that changed my life. Your life can do just the same. Would you pray with me? Jesus, you call us to follow you, and we really want to. It's hard. We like our positions of safety. We like having the world in a way that we feel that we can control it. Lord, I pray that you would give us the courage to step out from these positions of safety into positions of sacrifice. Lord, would you use us? God, would you forgive us for the times we mess up? They are many. We confess that we have sinned. We've fallen short of your calling in our lives. And Jesus, we need you. We want this friendship with you that changes our lives. We want to experience your grace and your forgiveness. Thank you that even when we are faithless, you are faithful. Help us to put our trust in that and that alone. Help us to have the courage to take the next faithful step in our life. Help us to have the courage to follow you. And God, as we do so, would you use us to change this world, to build your kingdom? God, we love you and pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.